Hi, my name is Mike, and I'm here to read a comic. And today's comic is Daredevil, issue number 51, dated April 1969. This is um, this is a fun comic. I had a lot of fun with this. I had a lot of fun with this comic after reading it, and I'll explain why. This is one of the early issues by an artist named Barry Smith, or as he's better known as Barry Windsor Smith. Um, Barry Smith had an interesting comic book career. He was a guy born in England, and he became a comic book fan because they imported comic books from the United States to England and probably other places in Europe. And I believe he got his start in comics was I think a year or two earlier. Stanley had gone and he had visited England. And he either met his wife there or he had already married her, and I guess they were visiting relatives, probably like business and pleasure on that trip. And Barry Smith, I guess they had some type of event. Barry Smith encountered Stanley. Barry was telling him what a great fan he was of Marvel Comics and how he wanted to be a comic book artist. Stanley hears this. He kind of glad hands him, saying, kid, I really like your moxie. And if you ever make it to New York, you just look us up in the Marvel offices, and we'll set you straight. And what surprised Stan Lee was that Barry Smith actually took this offer seriously. And he showed up in the Marvel offices in '69. And mind you, it was kind of hard to travel from Europe to the United States at that time. Stan, Stanley was, I guess he was probably aghast that someone actually took what he said seriously. So they had a problem. They had a 19-year-old kid who thought he had a job, and they're like, "Oh, we barely remember you." But nevertheless, they liked his art. It was clearly influenced by Jack Kirby and then later Jim Steranko. And you could see both those influences there in this issue. His style later on would evolve into something much different. You saw those in those great early Conans that he had done. And you actually can see his art evolving. Nevertheless, I'm going to talk a little about Daredevil and my buying experiences with Daredevil. I was never really a big fan of Daredevil. Uh, there were a couple of periods. I never had anything against Daredevil, but I never was a fan of Daredevil either. There were a couple of periods where the comics were really interesting. This is one of the periods. And I think later on, around issue 100, where Daredevil and the Black Widow are out in San Francisco, where I am right now. And that there were some interesting stories there. But of course, the the period of greatness with the title was, of course, when Frank Miller took over the title. Those those comics I loved. I think I have every single one of them. But overall, Daredevil was kind of a character I never really cared for. There are some instances in this issue that remind me why I did not really particularly care for Daredevil. I don't know much of the backstory, meaning what occurred in issue 50, because some of the consequences that occurred in issue 50 carry over here, because, Marvel serialized their titles for the most part. Some of that stuff I honestly don't care about. But nevertheless, I had a tremendous amount of fun with this issue. You get a sense that this was drawn by a guy who didn't have much experience but had a lot of enthusiasm. He 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 was influenced greatly, and you can see the influence right there. But he also sort of added his own elements. If I'm struggling a little, it's because of the mushrooms. And this comic was a great comic to read on mushrooms. I'll tell you that. I had a dream, and I actually was interacting with some of the imagery that was in here. And I'm gonna stop babbling at this point. I'm gonna get into the story. I'm gonna start with the creative team. Stan Lee's name is prominently mentioned. He was the editor. I guess he kind of oversaw some of the comics. He definitely oversaw the big selling titles. Daredevil was kind of like a middling title at this time, so Stan may have just kind of looked through it um, and kind of gave his okay. He has Roy Thomas writing it. Roy Thomas was Stan's big assistant at the time. This is a pretty good story, I thought, overall. Barry Smith, the artist. This is kind of the reason why I picked this issue. And the title is Run, Murdoch, Run. And I guess it's kind of a play on words because they talk about a DA's race and something going on there. So anyway, we see a splash page. We see an interesting perspective of a superpowered robot bursting through. It looks like a prison wall, and we see a prisoner here. He's conscious. Daredevil isn't conscious. The prisoner's hands are. That's a little inappropriate touching there. Well, the guy's been in prison for a while. Apparently, he knows Daredevil. Daredevil knows him. The inmate, assumes that the robot is after Daredevil. So he's like, here, you can take him. He's unconscious. I did all the work for you. You just take him and run along. But it turns out that that's not the case. And that the robot is actually, he's actually looking for the inmate. So the inmate is the target here. It's kind of a middle-aged man. I think he's like some type of crime lord. He figures out that the robot is after him and not Daredevil. So suddenly, I think after knocking Daredevil unconscious, he suddenly is trying to wake Daredevil up to have him protect him against this robot. The robot can interact with the person, so it does have AI. It's telling him that nothing can save you, Biggie Benson. So I'm assuming he's some type of gangster or crime lord. The robot grabs the prisoner. He's still screaming for help from Daredevil, though. So he's kind of a wimp here. We see the robot. It's an interesting design. I like the design. One of the problems that Barry Smith had at this time was definitely anatomy. His anatomy wasn't very good. And there's kind of like an unprofessional feel to it. But again, the unprofessional feel actually, I thought, improved things. So the robot is informing the prison guards that your bullets can't stop me because I'm made of some type of plastic form. So this, I guess he's made of carbon fiber. We can say, Biggie, he's begging for his life, and it turns out the guards they have actually a weapon. And it's a weapon that was designed by Tony Stark. It was called the Stunnernator, which is a terrible name, but it was designed for, quote, full-scale riot control. So all those kids out there that were protesting and stuff, Tony Stark was actually making weapons to have them stop that. So it was always kind of interesting that Marvel was such a favorite of the counterculture. But Marvel itself was not a fan of the counterculture, at least not in a meaningful way, probably more like the imagery. So anyway, they're not sure whether this Stuninator will work or not. But they said they have no choice. I'm thinking they used this in another issue though, and it worked there. So anyway, the robot does sense impending danger, and his prime directive is to protect himself. So he does drop Biggie there because again he has to worry about his own his own existence. The guards see this, they open fire, and there's kind of a power blast here. Again, I really enjoyed this art. I'm totally forgiving of any type of anatomy issues. It's just the energy and the look, and the fact that he's kind of aping Barry Smith is kind of aping the style of two other artists. I don't care. If this is a copy, this is a damn good copy. So anyway, the robot is feeling this, and I guess he's crying out in pain. He's attempting to grow. So I guess he does have some type of control over his size. The guards notice that the robot does seem to be crying out like a human. However, they're not terribly concerned about that. They're just concerned about, getting rid of this thing. So we turn the page, and they fire a huge blast at him. And they notice that it's falling. And it's still growing. By the way, they're also asking about where that inmate is. They can't find him. The robot is growing, but at the same time, he's losing consciousness. But Biggie sees this as an opportunity to escape. However, the robot's weight just comes crashing down. So you have this kind of dying unconscious robot, but at the same time, it's growing and growing. So the infrastructure of the building can't handle it. The robot and Biggie, they're coming crashing down as the catwalk can't support the weight. And it turns out that Biggie is dead. He's buried under all this rubble. The robot notices this. So the one singular task that this robot had, the one job he had, he kind of completed it, but he did so accidentally. However, there was some type of self-destruct mechanism with it. So the existence of the robot is done with also. And we'll turn the page. We see that Daredevil's getting some medical care. I'm assuming it's medical care from the prison, which might not be the best medical care around, but nevertheless, he's going to take it. This guy has a long ass needle. Oh man, I would be terrified if I saw this. The doctor's telling Daredevil that he's a lucky guy, and that the flesh wound that he had is healing much faster than normal. Daredevil, while he's told that he's lucky, he doesn't feel lucky. He's talking about how he lost his girl, he lost his best friend, he almost lost his life, and apparently he was about to retire from superheroing. But he wanted to do this one last thing, so he kind of realizes that, he almost lost everything from this one reckless decision to go out in glory. And he's also feeling a little bad that, it was the guards who stopped the robot, and he was kind of, flat on his back while this happened. Again, Daredevil wanted his little moment, to be the hero, but it didn't happen for him. Then he's talking about something about his blood. Yeah, there was a whole thing with Daredevil. He has some type of health issues. Oh yeah, he's saying he's become allergic to the sight of blood, especially his own. A little bit of humor there. So anyway, there's an inspector coming in, and this guy is drawn way too young to be an inspector in New York. Because those inspectors are like inspectors in the police department in New York City. They're like generals in the army. This guy's way too young for that. So anyway, the inspector and Daredevil, they're talking. Daredevil wants to get out of there as fast as possible, but the inspector has some questions. And it turns out that they unburied the robot, and they have him standing upright, but they don't know what to do with him because apparently, since he accomplished his mission, he's in total shutdown. Again, that's real life world. That's a very questionable decision that you would spend all this money to basically have a robot do one thing and then terminate its existence. It's like you kind of want to keep this around. And we'll turn and we see a couple of ads here. These are in-house ads for two comics that are coming out on the newsstand. One is The Silver Surfer, the fifth issue. I was never a big fan of these original Silver Surfers. He was just way too whiny for me. He was always complaining about something and the humanity. From what I understand, Stan Lee had a particular liking for the Silver Surfer character. Stan Lee was a Jew, but he was a Jew who liked Jesus. Jack Kirby was a little like that. Same way, not as much as Stan Lee. So Lee would kind of write the Silver Surfer as kind of being this kind of like Messiah, Jesus-like analog. But I think Stan Lee took it too far, and he became kind of turned the character into a whiner. Then we see Marvel collector's items. This is Marvel at this point at least had enough of a back catalog that they could start reprinting their old editions and make money from that. And eventually this would morph into Marvel's Greatest Comics with the Fantastic Four. I was always buying those as a kid. So on one hand, while I was never, I was too young to know anything about personally the Lee Kirby partnership when these comics first came out, like the Fantastic Four and stuff. Nevertheless, I kind of followed them through the reprints. And we see some merchandising. So they're trying to get into the inflatable plastic pillows. And I'm sure they look great here. I cannot imagine them lasting more than maybe 2 nights. They're only selling them for $1.50. So I'm sure these pillows were quite terrible. And they're also talking about, what is it? The Mary Marvel something. That was like a fan club they had. That was a big success because it made the fans feel like they were a part of these superheroes' lives. Anyway, kind of go back to the story. We see, I think, what is going to be turned out to be the main villain. And it's not a costume villain. It's just sort of a regular guy. His name is Star Saxton. And he's kind of like, he looks like something out of Austin Powers here. And, he's kind of like one of these young, sleek businessmen slash, world conquerors. And he's the one who got the robot to go after the gangster. And for some reason, he's happy that Biggie's gone, but at the same time, he felt bad that Biggie, wasn't able to get his revenge on Daredevil. But it turns out that this guy also wants to get Daredevil. So, yeah, that kind of doesn't make much sense there. He's talking about how the robot was intended to be like the perfect gangland murder weapon, which that doesn't hold true for I guess you could say most organized crime. A big lumbering robot like that would attract too much attention. We know the mob guys; they kind of generally want to keep things quiet and low, so that would not have worked. But when you think about it, supervillains in comic books really don't work. because they have all these tremendous resources, and they have all this technology, and they're out making money criminally, but they would make more money legally if they just simply patent their stuff. So, for example, I remember there was one villain, the I think it was called the Trapster. He was like Paste Pot Pete at first, and he would, he had this paste product, and he was able to weaponize it, and he would go out and he would rob jewelry stores. That made no sense because I mean, if you go to one of those, what's those guys who they're a front for criminal merchandise. Anyway, they're only gonna get like what 20 cents on the dollar, and if he had just taken his glue thing and gone to a patent lawyer, he would have made way more money just by patenting this product. So that's my long tangent on superhero economics. Anyway, we see the art. This guy's very dramatic. Oh, he's talking to himself. By the way, I always mention that the heroes think out loud and the villains talk to themselves. This guy talks to himself. So he's in the car. He's talking about a tracer. So apparently the robot had some type of tracer on him, and this guy Star Saxton, he figures out that the tracer probably fell off, and he wants to get it. Oh yes, the reason why he wants the tracer is so he can detonate the robot. Um, but he needs the tracer. Something going on with Daredevil and the Inspector. Daredevil's sort of using his radar um, abilities to somehow scan the robot, and he finds that there's a destruct mechanism, or quote, and something else, and something is telling him that this robot is going to self destruct. Daredevil doesn't have any real hard evidence to offer, but nevertheless, he makes the case to the inspector that, hey, we need to evacuate this area. The inspector takes this at face value. He believes in Daredevil, and they ordered the evacuation of the place. See, again, some really nice artwork. I'm totally forgiving of anything that looks cartoonish or out of proportion, because this art is so much fun to look at. So anyway, I think Star Saxton, he's tracking down the tracer. So he's just simply wandering the city. I think he has a tracer, and he actually calls it that. So he has a tracer, and he has a device that will trace the tracer. So he goes into an apartment. He doesn't really know anything about this place other than this is where the tracer is. And we see the apartment. Yeah, this is definitely 1960s type of living. Star is going through the apartment. Apparently, this is Matt Murdock's apartment. So the robot and Daredevil must have tussled there. Um, Star Saxon's just kind of putting this stuff together. And he finally finds the tracer, and the tracer is going to help him deactivate the robot or activate the self destruction protocols in it. Daredevil, with his Daredevil sense, his radar sense, is able to kind of figure this out. However, I don't know what's Daredevil apparently hits the chest plate of the robot, and that turns off the self destruction mechanism. Star Saxton is beside himself. He has a conversation coming up, and he is just talking up a storm here, and he's saying that he figured out it was Daredevil who did this, and he's going, I shall have my revenge. And they have like little dashes, so he's saying this almost like a robot. And turns out that Star Saxton, he's kind of noticing that he is in someone's apartment, that maybe he should try to find out who this person is. See a picture of Karen. We see Matt Murdock's diploma from law school. This guy is apparently aware of Matt Murdock. He knows him as a lawyer. He knows him as a blind lawyer. And here's a part that's a little dated. And he says, as they say, very interesting. That was something Artie Johnson, who's a comedian in the 1960s. He was on a show called Laugh-In that my mom loved. And that was kind of Artie Johnson's. That was his signature line, and so kind of quoting that there. Star's kind of snooping around. He comes across Daredevil's spare costumes in the closet, and he's kind of laughing at this, saying, "This guy's an amateur. I mean, really, he puts his costume on wire racks. Come on, dude." And this guy, he's figuring out that Matt Murdock is Daredevil. And then this guy, he's having this Hamlet like sequility. He's talking to himself. He's laying down on the chair, and he has the jazz hands going. This is big time talking to yourself, and he figures out that Matt Murdock isn't blind. He's just pretending to be blind. So he thinks that the blind act is. He thinks the Murdock being blind is an act rather than what we all know is that Daredevil was blind. So anyway, it turns out that he's going to confirm he's going to try to confirm some of these suspicions. I should add that like this guy Star Saxon, he kind of looks like John Hurt a little bit. He even sort of has that kind of sweaty, creepy look to him. Daredevil's out. He's swinging around town. He kind of feels pretty good because he feels like this is going to be his last time being Daredevil. And he's talking about his health. He says he does have a headache, and then something that normally doesn't happens, and that he uses his billy club kind of to swing around buildings, same way that Spider-Man would do his webbing. But it turns out that Daredevil misses a building, and he's in free fall. And I think he breaks his fall by grabbing onto a TV antenna. It still hurts though, because he's taking a pounding. And the thing is that Daredevil was sort of congratulating himself, thinking out loud, and now he realizes how dangerous things have become because he's not the Daredevil he used to be. So he goes back to his apartment. I think Star had already left. And he had mentioned that the robot had turned it into a shambles. So he's kind of like, so kids like me who didn't want to bother reading number 50 but are reading this, Roy Thomas is kind of helping you out here, letting you know what's going on. Matt is talking about his life, talking about how bad things are, and that he's glad that he's quitting the superhero game. He's really kind of doubting himself. We see these like black eyes from Daredevil, and that's to I guess represent the blindness. They sort of look like the original Stepford Wives movie where the robots had black eyes. That movie was so creepy. So anyway, Daredevil's trying to fix his life. And he has to fix his life with the two most important people in it. And that's Karen Page, and that is Foggy Nelson. And Karen and Matt had some type of fallout before But nevertheless, Matt calls Karen. Karen is greatly relieved that Matt called. She didn't know where he was, and she's not feeling well. Now, this is a part of Daredevil's personality I really didn't like. Um, Daredevil's being really arrogant on the phone, really full of himself, and he's a little condescending. So he's kind of like he's just an egotistical ass. And I noticed that over various errors, he was sort of written as this kind of chauvinistic asshole. And even in the Frank Miller run, you would see this. But it turns out that basically he wants to marry Karen, and he seems thrilled that Karen and him are now on speaking terms. You know, he hangs up the phone. He yells, "She loves me." Not Daredevil, not some scarlet buckler, but me. So yeah, he has a little bit of insecurity issues. So anyway, with things squared away with Karen, he's gonna call Foggy. Apparently, Foggy was running for DA. Matt had kind of ditched one of the campaign spots there, and it kind of caused some friction. Some interesting artwork, a little cartoony though. But it looks like Foggy is back on Matt's side again. Daredevil. This is some really, oh boy, this is some questionable choices in terms of art. Um, Matt Murdock, he's feeling good about himself. He got his girl back. He's got his partner back, and we see a little bit of cartoonish artwork here, where he's just so thrilled with life and how things have been for him. Kind of like he's like tossing dice and rolling sevens. Um, but then Matt notices that the dizziness has returned, and we see that what was his name? Star Saxton. He approaches Matt Murdock on the street, asking if he needs help. Matt says no, but he's very insistent. And just as they're about to cross the street, Saxton drops the name Daredevil. And he's making it clear that he knows that Matt Murdock is Daredevil. And this is kind of freaking Matt out. Um, See Matt, he's kind of in this crowd, kind of looking around. This guy has like a Dick Tracy fedora. Um, Matt Murdock uses his Daredevil sense, I guess the same way that Spider-Man would use his sense. I think it was Len Wein who came up with the idea that like Captain America has America sense, and that's why he could never be shot. And some of the writers said they love working for Len, but they also mentioned that he had some dumb rules, and that when you were writing Captain America, you had to include the America sense. So anyway, Daredevil's kind of freaking out here. It's really nice artwork. The hair is very reminiscent of what Jim Steranko would do. Star Saxons, he's looking on. He sees Daredevil's being discombobulated. We see a poster with Captain America on it. Around this time, this is when Jim Steranko was drawing those classic Captain America comics. So I guess this is a homage to it. And Matt Murdock, he's thinking out loud, and he realizes that someone knows his identity. And this is something else that I never really understood. Like, who cares? I mean, part of it's like I get it that okay, these guys are vigilantes. They're opening themselves up for lawsuits. They're doing a policing job that I don't believe the public had signed on for, but nevertheless, the idea that they had to keep a secret identity was always kind of weird to me. So anyway, so Matt Murdock, he's having kind of an existential crisis here because on one hand, he knows he has to go out. He feels the need to go out and find this Star Saxton, but at the same time, he doesn't want to dress up as Daredevil. And we see we see some really weird artwork here. This is really weird. First of all, it's in black and white. Most of it is in like Kirby Crackle. This is sort of like Kirby came up with this idea that you could show the tremendous amount of energy being built up by creating kind of this crackle feel. We see within the crackle there are like three images of Daredevil, and then there's I think Star Saxon. He's like screaming out in insanity, and this is kind of just very strange artwork here, but it's very reflective of the time. Okay, we see some really nicely drawn artwork here on the next page, where Matt encounters Karen Page. Apparently, there's a restaurant they like, Douchies, and it turns out that Matt and Karen they show up at the same time. They embrace. At first it's kind of like a touchy feely embrace because I don't think either one of them knows what the other is going to react, but they get closer and closer. It's very romantic, and I like what Barry Smith did to Matt Murdock's glasses because Karen is embracing him like face first, and kind of the glasses are getting in the way. That was a nice little thing to include. Karen and Matt they're talking things out over dinner in this restaurant, but it turns out that Matt's not feeling very well, and I think it looks like he's feeling faint. Karen notices this, but it turns out that I think our villain, what's his name, Star Saxton. He's in the restaurant. So Matt, using his Daredevil sense, notices. I guess he notices this sort of like disruption in the force, because based on this comic, it seems like Matt Murdock is like he's in contact with the force, and he knows he has an urge to go after this guy, even if it means like leaving his date alone. Matt's kind of like getting up. He's making a nuisance of himself because on one hand, he wants to go after this guy, but on the other hand, his health issues are coming back to bother him. Karen Page is upset. She's seeing the things that kind of drove her away from Matt returning. So this is like kind of drama queen Matt. Karen doesn't know whether she wants to be a part of this guy. And it turns out that Star Saxton actually approaches Karen directly. And, he makes the claim that, he's a friend. He doesn't know what's going on with him. And then he says that, since I'm a friend of Matt Murdock's and you seem to be very close, we should talk about our friend and see about his future. They take his cane, by the way. And this is sort of where the story goes off the rails a little. We see this kind of unusual image of, unusually inked image of Daredevil. I guess it looks like he's doing ballet. The perspectives are really bad. The anatomy's really bad. But that doesn't bother me. What bothers me is kind of like this weird pose he's making. Like he's almost doing this kind of like curtsy type motion. Matt's out there. He's a complete mess. I mean, Jesus Christ. Karen not only left the poor guy, she took the cane. So, I mean, Matt is just like, he's all over the place. And I don't know what Karen was thinking. Some interesting artwork here, very psychedelic. And turns out we're going back to the doctors. I guess at the prison hospital. Again, not necessarily the greatest care there. One of the doctors is mentioning the Stark vaccine. I think, yeah, that was the polio vaccine. So he's making reference. They're making reference to the polio vaccine because, I mean, just a few years earlier, just like 10 years earlier, kids were still dying of polio in the United States. And I mean, Jonas Stark kind of started the ball in terms of coming up with the vaccine for polio, but it was really another doctor called Sabian who sort of really developed the vaccine against that. And I think the two doctors were kind of always fighting with each other because I think Stark was more well known, but Sabian was kind of the genius of the two. So anyway, these guys are going back and forth. They notice that something is wrong with Daredevil's blood, and there's radioactive particles in there. So they figured probably these radioactive particles are the ones that are affecting Daredevil's health. The memo is dated 1/23/69. Kind of interesting there. I like that. We see imagery of Daredevil kind of on the run. It turns out that the doctors need to treat Daredevil for this radiation, or else he'll die quickly. But of course, being a masked vigilante, they don't have his number like readily available. And then it turns out that the police inspector who was talking to Daredevil earlier, he's on the case. He makes an all points bulletin to the police department to be on the lookout for Daredevil, that he's in need of medical treatment. We see Matt. He's in the alley. He had already been abandoned by Karen, and he is sweating. He is sweating profusely, and he's really tired. But at the same time, he's scared about going to sleep because he's not sure when he'll wake up. And that's the cliffhanger we are left with. And the next issue is called Death Calls for Daredevil. I think that's also a Barry Smith one, so I'll probably do that one next. Because I kind of want to go through some of the core titles first. Okay, so I'm going to go into Marvel Bulletins. Marvel Bullpen Bulletins. The first item is Stan Lee and talking about like the college tour he's doing. Yeah, yeah, he was very popular on those college tours. But the thing is, he would just run his same spiel all over again. So he's on one hand he enjoyed the money and the applause that he would get from these college students, but at the same time he's kind of a little critical of what they were doing, and he wasn't quite on board with them. It was similar to like Muhammad Ali, because Muhammad Ali would go to these college campuses, and he would speak to the young college students at the time, but those events didn't really go very well because Ali was a Muslim, so he would say, don't be inebriated, don't have sex outside of marriage. Don't do this, don't do that. Pray to Allah 5 times a day. And the college kids at the time were kind of like, fuck that. So, yeah, so it wasn't until later when Ali sort of became less openly religious that he became really popular. Okay, we see another case. We'll go through the other items. Yeah, just talking about some of the office stuff. I don't really care. Oh, yeah, they're talking about Federico Fellini. He was a well known director. He was probably the best known Italian director at the time. He was a big fan of Marvel. He enjoyed reading Marvel comics, and he I believe he actually got pretty excited when he first met Stan Lee, from what I read. So they're talking about that. Okay, they're going through something called the Mighty Marvel Checklist. And these are the comics that were out on the newsstand at this time. I'll take a look at the issues. Not Brand Ech, number 13. That was Marvel's parody title. Not Brand Ech was something. Brand Ech was something that Stan Lee would call DC. So it's kind of like an inside joke. The art was really great. The humor was terrible. I would pass on it. Fantastic Four, number 86. Yeah, this is after Fantastic Four had peaked at this point. I think Kirby was looking for an exit, so there were a lot of stories during this time that were based on episodes of TV shows that Kirby liked, because he wanted to keep the good ideas for himself, because he was going to DC at this point. Spider-Man number 72. Return of the Shocker. Yeah, I like the Shocker was fine. I never had problems with the Shocker as a villain. Avengers number 63, and this was a weird period for the Avengers. They After John Buscema had left the title, the title kind of like went into, I guess, kind of like a creative rut. I didn't really like Gene Colan's work with the Avengers, and there were a few other artists that kind of like were kind of brought in, and I didn't really was impressed with them. Barry Smith eventually would do a couple of Avengers at this time. X-Men number 55. That was when the title was kind of reviving itself. The Strangle issues were already done, and this is just before Neil Adams came on board, and really kind of just changed the comic book industry, because like he was doing Marvel stuff now, and that stuff was amazing. Thor number 163. Never really cared for Thor, because the problem with Thor is that you had to learn the Asgardian mythology, and I never really liked that stuff. Again, I like the one singular, Marvel universe. Like I said, I never liked the alternative reality ones, because I didn't want to learn about another universe. Captain America 113. That was the last part of that great Steranko run. So if you had 12 cents, if you can go back in time and you had 12 cents, that's the comic you would have bought. Hulk number 115, Return of the Leader. I'm going to do some Hulks. Iron Man 13, The Controller. I think Johnny Craig was doing the layouts during this time. And Johnny Craig was a little like Barry Smith here, in that he would choose like unusual layouts to do. The problem with Johnny Craig was, as good an artist as he was really slow, and it would drive like William Gaines crazy when he worked with Craig at EC Comics. But nevertheless, I really enjoyed his Johnny Craig's artwork is great. Get a chance to see it. Submariner 13. I'm going to do a couple of Submariners. I like the later issues. Submariner's kind of an underrated title, because he had some interesting problems throughout his run. Captain Marvel number 13. I suspect this is probably a pedestrian issue. Captain Marvel at this time. Yeah, I think Captain Marvel was created. I think it was actually William Goodman, who was the actual owner and publisher of Marvel Comics. Stan Lee was the public face of Marvel, but Goodman was the guy who actually owned the company. And he really wanted that Captain Marvel name. But the problem was, at the time, it was copyrighted, because you had the Shazam character was still called Captain Marvel. But then when Goodman found out that no one renewed the copyright to Captain Marvel, he swooped in, and he ordered his team to create this character. So Captain Marvel exists because of corporate edict. Shield number 12. I liked some of those Shields. Not as a kid, but as an adult, I enjoyed them. Doctor Strange 180. Uh, I never really cared for Doctor Strange outside of the Defenders. Uh, Sergeant Fury number 65. Yeah, I don't care about that. Captain Savage, that was another war comic. I think these war comics ended up, I think probably 99% of them ended up in Army PXs. Because I don't remember any kids buying these World War II comics, but I bet if you took them and put them into an Army PX along with some Westerns, those guys would buy it. Marvel superheroes. That was the combination of new stuff and old stuff. It was sort of like Marvel Premiere where they would test out titles. This one has Doctor Doom and his solo adventure. Marvel Tales number 20, that's the Spider-Man reprint. I always bought those. Then we kind of have some Millie the Model and Mad About Millie and Chili. Yeah, those that's kind of Marvel's way of competing for the Archie audience. And they talk about some stuff that's still on the newsstand, the Silver Surfer. We talked about that. Mighty Marvel Western number 4. Yeah, the westerns were weird. They had a lot of material, but they didn't have much of a market. I'm talking about the Rawhide Kid. So yeah, those are the comics that were on the newsstand, and I would have bought quite a few of these. Okay, I didn't really look at any of the ads. None of them interest me. I'm gonna look at this letter page. It's 2 pages. It's probably more interesting than the story itself. And you can see the evolution of the responses from Marvel. Because the letters here are largely focusing on issue number 47. Issue number 47 of Daredevil was one of the, I guess, classic landmarks of Marvel Comics back then, because it was an issue that had a lot of action, but it also had a lot of characterization. It touched upon race issues, though not in the traditional way, at least back then. Although it was still a little problematic, that story. I'm talking about Brother Take My Hand. So anyway, I'm going to go into the letters. The first one has tremendous amount of praise for Brother Take My Hand. Talked about how good the art was. Talked about how good the story was. Does mention that the setting was in Vietnam, and this person was a little leery. It's Bruce, this guy's name, from North Carolina. He was a little leery about Marvel taking on such a subject, but nevertheless, he felt that they framed it correctly. They talked about Willie Lincoln, who is the main character that Daredevil met in that issue. Basically, Daredevil was sort of like going on the CEO. What is it? A USO show. A lot of times, like a lot of celebrities, like Bob Hope and John Wayne and like Raquel Welch, they would sort of visit the troops in Vietnam and kind of like have a little stage performances for them. You can see this in like Apocalypse Now, where there was a scene like that. The Bruce is saying that he was happy that they brought in a black character. He uses the word Negro. So I guess that was sort of like, at the time, Negro was sort of like, it was on the way out, but nevertheless people were still using it at that time. Saying kind of a lot of times when there are Negro characters in comics, they usually play stereotypical roles. He's happy that Marvel did not do that with this particular character. And he is just full of praise. But you look at what editorial wrote, it seems like they're talking at him rather than to him, because the response sort of feels like Stan Lee's spiel. He would have this pre-rehearsed spiel that he would use on his audience. And that response has a feel. So it kind of feels like Bruce was talking to them, and Marvel was talking at him. And this runs in the second letter too, where again, lots of praise. The fact that there was a three-dimensional feel to it, that there was characterization in the story, that they were not used to this. They were sort of used to those kind of bland stories from DC, and Marvel was sort of focusing more on characterization. And a lot of fans feel that that story, Brother Take My Hand, was sort of the one of the high points of Marvel's, the Marvel method of focusing on characterization and stuff. Um, Again, this guy Donald, full of praise, talking about how well Tom Palmer can. Oh, he does. Yeah, he doesn't like Tom Palmer Palmer's work on Gene Colan's inks. Palmer is a great inker. He Neil Adams's work on Daredevil, but I guess it didn't translate well to Colan's pencils. Talking about he's talking about Willie Lincoln, saying that Stanley came up with a great character, and editorials like talking at this guy. This guy's Donald, and they're not even addressing what he said. And the next letter is again, it's a shorter letter, but again full of praise. And again, Marvel's. I feel like Stanley's just talking at these guys. There's something here I'll go back to, but I'll go forward the letters. Uh, College Junior is writing in, talking about Daredevil 48, talking about, he's talking about Matt Murdock's personal life with Karen, and how I guess the ups and downs were kind of getting on this guy's nerves, because I know some of the love triangles in these early Marvel comics would get on my nerves. In fact, they would even make fun of those triangles in Not Brand. Ugh. So this guy is saying, just marry them off and just focus on stuff that's fun. Um, Now editorial, I notice, is loosening up a little, so they're actually addressing Jim's concerns. They're telling him, hey, life isn't that easy, and that people have problems and they have to work through them. I guess this letter kind of touched them a little more personally, um, and they're saying, just realize that real life problems are kind of pain in the ass. The next letter is talking about issue 45, 46, and the Jester. I don't think this person liked those issues. Oh, this is interesting. They're talking about a legal point, and this actually came up in real life, where I think there was a trial, and the Jester was accused of murder, but there was no body found. And back then, if there's no body, there's no crime, and there's no murder, and there's no investigation. And that held true for decades afterwards. I think in the 90s and 2000s, there was a mafia case where two mafia associates were accused of killing a man. The police did not have a body, yet the prosecution was able to successfully try both these men for the murder, and the murder of someone whose body they couldn't find. So this actually does touch upon a real life situation. Again, editorial, they're evolving here. They're actually answering George back. Um, I'm not going to go into it. It reads like kind of like amateur lawyering. I think I always felt that a lot of comic book writers were kind of frustrated lawyers. I guess if you're like making a case for yourself, and you have that type of mentality, you kind of go into it. And yeah, again, this is true to life because people would watch, shows like CSI, and they treat those shows like documentaries. And at one point, prosecutors would have to tell prospective jurors that they can't quote enhance the DNA or do any of that stuff they would see on TV. So yeah, it's kind of two forward letters. And the next letter is about Daredevil 47. Again, high praise. Talking how beautiful the story was, and basically it was one of the vets had gone blind during Daredevil's performance, and Daredevil noticed this guy freaking out, and Daredevil got to know him later on, and when the soldier returned to New York, he was blind. He had to have a seeing eye dog. Daredevil kept in contact with him. They got involved in some type of gangland war. And I'm not going to spoil the issue for you. It's Marvel was very proud of that issue. But in reading these letters, I think Stan Lee did not realize what he had done. And I guess you call it, he kind of stumbled into this to the great story, because sometimes greatness is completely by accident. And this guy's name is Tom, and he has full of praise, and he likes what the story had to say about race and stuff like that. The story is a little problematic in that there's little like a white savior complex, but nevertheless, it's a good issue. And again, their editorial, the responses, they're evolving. They're actually kind of talking back to the people, talking with them, kind of saying, "Listen, we don't want to sound smug or pretentious, but we know we came up with a good story there." I don't think they really did. I think they kind of stumbled upon something, and then they realized, oh, this is how it's done. And we got the last letter, and again, full of praise. Um, the person liked the characterization in that of Willie Lincoln, in that usually in comics, when a character would go through like a life changing transformation, like going blind, the character was sort of treated as though the consequences were no big deal. And this issue, the consequences were a big deal, because when Willie went blind, he freaked out. He didn't know what to do. He was kind of thinking about suicide. They kind of touched on that as quietly as they could. And again, this guy Gary says, yeah, that's the type of characterization we want in our comic books. And editorial, they're talking to Gary, telling him, hey, thanks for the kind words, and we hope to have stories like that up soon. Okay, so there's one other thing I wanted to look at, and apparently there's a ranking system for Marvel readers. I had never known about this. Uh, it's something like you really can't take it too seriously. But they have various they have, I forgot what's that word. Um, Anyway, they have various initials for the type of buyer you are. So one is RFO, Real Fanatic One. This is someone who buys at least 3 Marvel magazines a month. I was beyond that. I would buy 3 a week. But so yeah, if you're a real fanatic, you are RFO. The other one is TTB, which is Titanic True Believer. And this is, I guess these are kind of like the nerds who would notice errors in the comic books, and they're kind of the inspiration for the No Prize. Next one is QNS, Quite Nuff Sayer. A fortunate frantic, one who's had a letter printed. Okay, so yeah, there were certain kids who would write into these comic books, editorial, and they would basically write just to have their letter printed. And sometimes they would actually know how to game the system. Like they would notice certain comics would get fewer letters, so then they would try to write one to that. Apparently, it was kind of a big deal to have a letter printed. Of course, it was printed name, address, so all the pervos would know which kids to discuss comics with. I remember one. I think Superboy was one where they didn't get very many letters. So if you were desperate to have a letter printed, you'd write Superboy. Okay, there's KOF, Keeper of the Flame, one who recruits a newcomer to Marvel. So I guess if you're the kid who tells others, you gotta buy this Marvel comic. This is Marvel, 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 DC. Oh fuck them. Yeah, so those are the converts. Those are like the cult followers. And then we have PMM, Permanent Marvelite Maximus. Anyone possessing all four of the other titles. Oh, okay. Okay, so if there's a Venn circle and you fall under like perfectly in all four of these characters, you are PMM, and then there's FFF, Fearless Front Facer, an honorable title bestowed for devotion to Marvel, above and beyond the Call of Duty. I guess these, I guess these guys were the ones who would come up with conventions or just talk to anyone about comics, or they weren't ashamed of being fans of comics. I remember, I think it was around sixth grade, where I noticed that being seen with a comic book was like super embarrassing. And good luck getting a date, even if you were like a known comic book reader. So I think because they're getting used to like all these college kids coming and writing them. So that's about it for my review of walkthrough. I guess 50 Daredevil number 51, and I hope to have more reviews up soon. Bye.